April 1886. Caleb Mercer paid $30 and a postage stamp for a wife he had never met, and he was standing on the platform at Red Fork with that woman's letter folded in his shirt pocket when the train brought him someone he did not expect. The woman who stepped down onto the boards already owned the 400 acres he had spent 6 years calling his own, and she had known it before she answered him. Her name was Adeline Vance, and she came off the last car alone, a small leather valise in one gloved hand and a worn brown book held against her chest the way a person holds the one thing they are not willing to lose. She was not what the letter had promised. The letter had promised a plain widow of modest means who could keep a house and ask for little. The woman on the platform stood straight as a fence post, chin level, hazel green eyes moving once across the depot in the dust, and the man waiting by the rail, and there was nothing modest about the way she took his measure in a single breath. Caleb pulled his hat off because his mother had raised him to. "You'd be Mrs. Vance," he said. "I would," she said, "and you'd be the man living in my father's house." He thought he had misheard her over the hiss of the brakes. He smiled the way a man smiles when he is sure a joke is coming. "You've got me confused with somebody, ma'am. I built that house. 4 years it took me. Dug the well myself." "I don't doubt it," Adeline said. "You dug a fine well. On land that was deeded to Eli Vance in 1871 and to his daughter after him." She did not raise her voice. "That would be me." Behind them, the station master, a round man named Pruitt, had stopped pretending to sort the mailbag. 2 ranch hands waiting on a freight order had gone still by the water barrel. A girl of about 9, the depot agent's daughter, sat on a crate, swinging her boots and watching the way children watch, without shame. Caleb Mercer had ridden 11 miles into town to meet a bride he had agreed to marry sight unseen, because a man alone past 30 on a hard piece of grassland learns that pride is a poor thing to keep him warm in January. He had not ridden in to be told the grass was not his. "My deed's filed at the county seat," he said, lower than he meant to. "I've paid the tax on it 5 years running. I'm sure you have." Something moved across her face then, and it was not triumph. It looked almost like sorrow. "Mr. Mercer, I didn't come here to take a roof out from under you. I came because the only way I could see my father's land again was to marry the man who's working it. So I answered your letter. I'm sorry I had to lie about the kind of woman I am to do it." The whole platform had heard her now. Pruitt found his voice first, and what came out of him would follow Caleb the rest of the year. "Mail order's tricky business," the station master said, loud enough for the hands at the barrel. "Sent off for a meek widow and got handed a landlord." One of the cowboys laughed into his fist. The other called him the landlord's husband before the words were even cold, and the girl on the crate covered her mouth, and that was how the name found Caleb Mercer before he had so much as helped his bride into the wagon. The landlord's husband. It would be painted on him at the feed store, in the churchyard, across the bar at the Drover's Rest, all through that long, strange summer. He did not answer any of them. He picked up her valise, because it was the only thing he knew how to do, and held out his hand to help her up to the wagon seat, and Adeline looked at it a moment before she took it. Her grip was firm, and her palm hard along the base of the fingers, the hand of a woman who had done work, not the soft hand the letter had let him imagine. He would keep noticing such things all summer, small, true things that did not match the easy story the town had already decided to tell. What he did not yet know was why a woman who owned 400 acres outright had nothing left in the world but a valise, a book, and a stranger's name. The ride out ran 11 miles across open grass, going gold at the edges, and they did not speak for the first 3. A meadowlark went up out of the bluestem, and Adeline turned her head to follow it, and Caleb saw that she knew the country, that her eyes went to the low places where the water would be, and to the line of cottonwoods that meant the creek. "You're from here," he said. "It was not a question. I was born in the side of your house is built over," she said. "Before my father put up the frame house that burned. It's under your kitchen floor." He had wondered about that older, harder, packed earth he'd struck digging the cellar, and thought somebody had homesteaded and failed before him, not that the somebody might be sitting beside him. "What happened to it?" he said. "The frame house. Fire, the winter I was 11, my mother in it. My father got me out the window and went back for her, and there was nothing to get. After that, he couldn't stand the place. He took me east to his sisters in Ohio and never came back, and he never sold, and he never could speak of it. He died still owning land he couldn't bear to look at. And I grew up a poor relation in another woman's house, on the charity of an aunt who never let me forget I cost her good money to feed. $300 I owed her, by her own accounting, the day my father was buried. She had it written in a book. And the land was yours all that time, mine, and worth nothing to a girl in Ohio with no money to work it. My aunt wanted me to sell it to a neighbor for $40 to clear my debt to her. $40 for 400 acres of bottomland with a year-round creek, to be rid of me a little richer. She turned the book over in her lap. Then a man in this county filed a notice that he was working an abandoned claim and meant to perfect title to it. My father's claim. That man was you. The county wrote to the last address of record, my aunt's house, and she threw the letter in the stove without telling me, because a notice like that meant the land had value, and value meant I might get out from under her. Caleb felt the back of his neck go hot. I filed that in good faith. The place stood empty 6 years. No tax paid, no fence kept, no name a soul in this county could give me. The law lets a man perfect a claim that's been let go. I'm not accusing you of theft, Miss Mercer. I dug your letter out of the stove myself before it caught, half-burned, and read what the county clerk wrote at the bottom. He wrote that the original deed holder could still answer the notice in person inside 1 year and stop you and keep the land. I had no money to come west and answer a notice. Then your second letter came to the same address, the one looking for a wife, with the $30 enclosed for her passage. Same man, same land. My way home paid for, in my hand. Her voice came near to breaking. So I am the woman who lied to you. I took your $30 and I rode your fare, and I am going to live in my own mother's grave ground, married to a stranger. Because that was the only door left open to me, and I am not too proud to walk through a door because of how it's shaped. Caleb drove a while in silence with that sitting between them. What she had handed him was not a quarrel. It was a grief, and he did not know how to take a grief apart. So he stopped the wagon at the top of the rise where the whole place opened out below them. The creek bright in its cottonwoods, the house small and white in the bottom, and he handed her the reins. "You drive us down," he said. "You ought to be the one to bring yourself home." Adeline took the reins, and when they came down into the yard her face was wet, and she let it be wet and did not turn away, and Caleb understood that he had done something larger than he meant to. They were married 3 days later in the front room of the Lutheran parson, because a man and a woman could not go on living under one roof unmarried, whatever the deed said. She wore her navy traveling dress and the thin gold locket at her throat, the only fine thing she owned, and inside it, Caleb would learn much later, were two clippings of hair, her mother's and her father's, all she had carried out of one burning house. The parson's wife pursed her lips the whole while, because the story was already through the town, and Mrs. Tolliver would be the second voice that summer to say the cruel thing out loud. A marriage of convenience is one thing, Mrs. Tolliver said afterward to the church wives. But that one married the deed, not the man. She'll have his land and his name, and give him nothing but the cold side of the bed, you mark me. And she laughed, and the wives laughed with her, and the name the cowboy coined on the platform got a partner. The landlord's husband had married the coal-bed bride. The town settled in to watch the two of them fail. The trouble was that they did not fail, and they did not even argue much, and that was the most aggravating thing a watching town can be handed. Adeline Vance had not been raised soft in that Ohio house. She had been raised used. She knew how to dose a foundered horse and keep books to the penny, because a poor relation who wants to keep her bed earns it twice over. And Caleb Mercer, who had expected a meek widow he would have to carry, found himself married instead to the most capable person he had ever stood next to, and he had the sense, rare in a proud man, to be glad of it rather than sore. She found the leak in the spring house the first week, a thing he had been chasing for 2 years. She walked the fence line and told him which posts the frost had heaved and which the cattle had loosened, and she was right about every one. She took his ledger, a year of receipts in a coffee tin, and made it into a book that told him for the first time exactly what his place earned and what it cost, and tapped one line. "You're selling your steers too early," she said. "Every fall, the day the buyer comes through, because you need the cash and he knows it. Hold 'em 8 weeks and grass finish them on the bottom hay, and you'll get $9 a head more." I ran it twice. Caleb looked at the figures a long time. "My father sold the day the buyer came," he said, "and his father before him. Your father didn't have the bottom hay. You do, because you cut my mother's old meadow that nobody's touched in 15 years, and it came in thick." She closed the book. "It's good ground, Mr. Mercer. You've kept it well. Better than I had any right to hope a stranger would." It was the first thing she had said that was not edged, and he held on to it. If you've ever been completely wrong about someone in the first 60 seconds, the way a whole town was wrong about Adeline Vance, then settle in, because the turn in this one is worth staying for. And if stories like this find you where you live, take a moment now and subscribe so the next one comes to you when it's ready. Now, back to the Bottomland, and the long, dry month, and the man who had been waiting 6 years for somebody to fail on that creek. His name was Royce Tilden, and he wore a black frock coat in July, which tells you most of what you need to know about a man on the high plains. He owned the Bartee to the north and a piece of the bank in Red Fork. And he wanted the Mercer Bottomland the way a thirsty man wants water, because Caleb's Creek ran year-round and his range did not, and in a dry country the man who holds the water holds everything. He had tried to buy it twice. Caleb had said no twice. Tilden was not a man accustomed to a third no. He came to call the second week of the dry spell and sat his horse in the yard without getting off it, which was its own kind of insult. "Hard luck, Mercer," he said, smiling. "A man builds a place and finds out he was squatting on it. The land's tangled now, 2 claims on it, and a court could eat your whole herd in lawyer's fees. I'll give you $1,500 for the both of your interests, clean today. It was a fair-sounding offer and a robbery, and every soul in the yard knew it. $1,500 for 400 acres of watered bottom land was the price of a man's fear, not his land. Caleb opened his mouth, and Adeline came out onto the porch and answered before he could. "The claims aren't tangled, Mr. Tilden," she said pleasantly. "They're the same claim. I'm the deed holder and he's my husband, and a wife's land becomes her husband's to manage the day she marries. There's no court fight. There's just one title, and it's ours, and it isn't for sale at 1,500 or 15,000. She smiled exactly as wide as he had. "But thank you for riding all this way to tell us what it's worth. You've confirmed a number I'd guessed at." Tilden's smile stayed on his mouth and left his eyes. "Clever," he said. "Folks did say clever." He gathered his reins. "Dry summer, Mrs. Mercer. Lot of ways a place can come to grief in a dry summer. Creek's been known to wander. Fences been known to fall." And he turned his horse and rode out, and the threat hung in the hot, still air long after the dust had settled. That night, Caleb sat on the porch step, cleaning a rifle he had not cleaned in a year, and Adeline came and sat one step down from him. The creek talked in the dark. "A whippoorwill started up in the cottonwoods." "He means it," Caleb said. "He's run 2 families off that I know of. Dammed a man's creek above his line one August and let him watch his cattle die of thirst on his own grass. Then bought the place for the back taxes. I know what he is," Adeline said. "My father lost his nerve to fire and never got it back. Lost his land and his heart years before the law could have taken it, because grief made him too tired to fight." She turned and looked up at Caleb in the dark. "I didn't cross the country and marry a stranger to lose it again to a man in a town coat. I came here for the land. I'll not pretend I didn't. But somewhere between the platform and tonight, I stopped being only here for the land. And I'd thank you not to make me say more than that on a porch step with a whippoorwill carrying on." Caleb did not make her say more. He laid his hand over hers on the cold step, and she turned her hand and held it, and that was enough. The creek went dry on a Tuesday in the 3rd week of the drought, and it had no business doing so. It was a spring-fed creek that had run through droughts which cracked the prairie like old leather. Caleb stood in a stream that should have been knee-deep and felt the bottom drop out of his ear. Then Adeline, walking the bank upstream, called his name in a voice he had not heard her use. And he came at a run, and she pointed across the line fence to the north onto Tilden's ground, where a new earthen dam stood raw and dark against the dry grass, and the whole flow of the creek lay backed up behind it in a flat brown pond, watering Tilden's cattle and starving theirs. He did it above the line, on his own land, Caleb said, his hands closing into fists. "There's no law in the territory will make a man let water off his own ground. He'll let our stock go thirsty till we sell to him for nothing, and the county will say it was a dry year." But Adeline was not looking at the dam. She was looking at the old course of the creek, at the lay of the ground, with the look Caleb had learned to watch for. The look of a woman taking a thing apart to see how it was built. "My father walked this creek with me 100 times before the fire," she said slowly, crouching to lay her hand flat on the dry gravel. "There's an old channel. The creek used to run a second arm down through our bottom before a flood the year I was born threw it all to the one bed. He showed me where the old arm went under and said the water was still down there. Sleeping she stood, and the dry wind took a strand of chestnut hair across her face. The spring that feeds this creek doesn't rise on Tilden's land. It rises on ours. If we open the old channel on our own bottom above where his dam backs up to, the spring will fill it and run down through our land and never touch his pond at all. The water was always ours. He dammed a creek that was already going to leave him. It took them 4 days. Caleb, with a borrowed slip scraper and a mule, and Adeline beside him in a man's old shirt with a shovel, opening a channel her father had shown her 30 years before. The town came out to watch a fool dig, and Mrs. Tolliver said the coal-bed bride had finally driven the poor man clean mad, digging a ditch to nowhere in the worst drought in 10 years. On the 4th evening, in the long copper light, Caleb broke through the last few feet of the old channel's head, and the ground went dark, and then wet. And then the spring water that had run down that buried arm in his bride's grandfather's time came up cold and clear out of the earth, found the channel her memory had drawn, and ran sweet and certain down through the bottomland, past the thirsty cattle that lifted their heads and came at a trot, and never once crossed onto Tilden's ground. The fence emptied of laughers one by one, and one of the cowboys who had named Caleb the landlord's husband on the platform that first day walked down to the new stream alone and crouched and put his bare hand flat in the running water as if to be sure it was real, and felt it cold and living against his palm, where the whole county had sworn there was nothing but dust. He looked at the woman in the man's shirt with the chestnut hair come loose and said nothing at all. There was nothing left to say. Royce Tilden rode down the next morning. He sat his horse at the new channel a long while, looking at the water running where he had been so sure none could run, looking at the dam he had built to drown a thing that had simply walked around him. "You'll want to take that dam down before the fall rains," Adeline said, not unkindly. "Back up that much water on dry ground, and the first hard storm will let it go all at once and take your hay barn with it. My father always said you can't get rich holding back water. It only waits." She looked up at the man in the black coat. "We won't take you to law over it, Mr. Tilden. The water already ruled." Tilden looked down at her a long moment, and something in his face that had been hard for a great many years went tired instead. He had spent his life being the cleverest one on the range, and had just been beaten by a dead man's memory carried home in his daughter's head, and he knew it. "Folks did say clever," he said again, quietly, and this time there was no threat in it at all. He touched his hat brim to her and not to Caleb, and rode back up to take down his dam, and he never troubled the Mercer place again. They grass-finished the steers that fall and got the $9 a head and paid off the $300 Adeline had owed her aunt to the penny. And on a cold, clear night in October, Caleb came in from the barn and found his wife at the kitchen table over her father's old book, and she had been crying, and she was smiling, and she turned the book so he could see. She had been writing in it, adding her own hand to her father's hand, the years he could not bear to set down. The fire, the leaving, the long debt, and then, at the bottom, in fresh ink, the spring and a channel, and the man who had handed her the reins at the top of the rise and let her bring herself home. "I came west for the land," she said. "I want it written down true that I came for the land." She closed the book and laid her hand flat on its cover the way she had laid her hand flat on the dry gravel. "And I want it written down true that I stayed for you." The town stopped calling Caleb Mercer the landlord's husband somewhere in that long summer, the way a name dies when it stops being able to hurt. By the next spring they called him a lucky man, which was nearer the truth and still not all of it, and the coal-bed bride became, in the telling, the woman who knew where the water was, which was the most a hard country could offer by way of an apology, and Adeline took it as one. She had arrived owning the land and nothing else, a debt and a valise and a book of grief, and the town had read her wrong in the first 60 seconds, the way towns do, had decided she was a schemer who married a deed. But a deed is only paper. What Adeline Vance truly carried home, the thing no aunt could account for and no land baron could damn, was 30 years of a dead man's love and a map of where the water sleeps. The land had been hers on paper all along. She did not make it hers until she gave it back its water and gave a quiet stranger her staying. They are both gone now, long gone. Under the cottonwoods, where the second arm of the creek still runs every spring as faithfully as it ran the evening it first came up out of the dark. But the creek remembers, and so now do you. If this story stayed with you, sit with it a moment before you go. Have you ever been completely wrong about someone in the first minute, the way a whole town was wrong about Adeline Vance, only to find that the person you wrote off was carrying the very thing you needed most? Tell me about them in the comments. I read every one. And if you want another story about a person the world underestimated who turned out to be holding the deed all along, there's one waiting for you right here.